Chapter 20. That night I did not sleep. I had obtained from my friend, before leaving him, a Greek translation of the sermon, prepared by him for his own use. There were certain passages which I had not quite understood when I had heard them in the original Aramaic. Some of them I had not heard at all, my attention having been fixed at the time on the effect which the utterances produced on the scribes and scholars. Further, the mood of that afternoon had not been adapted to a reasoned and objective hearing. Now I had the sermon before me in a civilized language. I analyzed it point by point and came to the conclusion that the activities of this man, however innocent their outward form, for he would have it that he sought only to guide human beings in paths of righteousness, could in time become extremely troublesome. Besides, he was by no means the helpless weakling which he pretended to be. His teachings could become dangerous to the religious regime of the Jews themselves, and we were interested in perpetuating the power of their present rulers, and therefore to our own rule. It was possible that he constituted a threat to the entire Latin civilization in the Orient. In that part of the world, such ideas spread among the ignorant masses with the speed of fire in a dry forest, and among all the Eastern races, none is so inflammable as the fanatical and fantastically minded Jews. These things always begin very innocently, being at first only internal religious matters, and they always end up with revolts against the prevailing local power and against Rome. Oh, we have had our experiences, for however they conceal themselves behind the mask of religion with which we do not interfere, they all have one ultimate purpose: to overthrow the foreign dominant power. Those uprisings of the Jews were much too costly for us to regard them with indifference. We had to exercise care and remain perpetually on the watch. Once they adopt a cult, they cling to it to the death. Before Pilate and I came to the country, in the days of the first procurator, Coponius, a man rose in their midst. Judah the Galilean was his name. He began, as far as I can make out, just like this rabbi, with something purely religious. It had nothing to do with us. He launched among the Galilean masses a motto or proverb, something in their own language which meant, "To God alone belongs dominion." The phrase caught, it spread, it carried everything before it, for if dominion belonged only to their God, their duty was to oppose all foreign rule. And sure enough, they began to withhold their tax payments. They drove the tax collectors from the country towns. They raised the standard of revolt. They formed armed bands which took refuge in the caves. They attacked passing travelers and caravans, and they nourished the idea of driving out our legions. It is hardly necessary to say that we soon disposed of them. The procurator took swift and energetic action. The leaders were nailed to the cross. Numbers of them were sent to the slave markets, others to various arenas, and still others to the galleys. Many years later, traveling on a government ship from Alexandria to Caesarea, I came across a survivor of the rebellion. The captain informed me that among the slaves chained to the oars there was one, a phenomenal creature, who had outlasted 12 years of service. I was sufficiently interested to descend into the bowels of the ship, and there I saw a giant of a man swaying back and forth among the others fastened to the oar, in such wise that they could not move without dragging their heavy load backward and forward. His eyes, burned out, consisted of nothing more than 2 red holes oozing blood and pus. His body was covered with long tangles of grey hair, gummed together by filth. He thrust his mighty breast forward and dragged it back to the rhythm set by the hortator, and the moment he lagged behind the tempo, the lead-loaded whip descended on his body. An unbearable stench rose from the mass of human flesh. These slaves were a collection of the foulest murderers and rebels, and we let them putrefy in their own filth. They received just enough food to remain alive and fulfill their task of driving the ship forward. We were not so short of slaves as to be compelled to pay special attention to their condition. The truth is that we scarcely knew what to do with the huge numbers of war prisoners, rebels, and criminals provided by our colonies. The Caesar Tiberius is not noted for extravagance, and he does not spoil either the provinces or the Roman plebs with too many shows. It is not a question of men to be thrown to the animals. Those are plentiful enough, but the animals represent a considerable expense. Our largest outlet for men was in the galleys. Except for him, the hortator told me, I haven't met one who has lasted longer than 6 or 8 months. But that man, he pointed to the blind Maccabean, has been there for 12 years. We don't understand what power keeps him alive. Overcoming my revulsion, I approached the slave, and I heard him muttering something to himself in his incomprehensible language. That, said the hortator, is the war cry of their fellowship. He keeps on repeating it to himself. And what does it mean? I asked. It means, to God alone belongs dominion, he answered. Thus he sat, blind, half rotted away, steeped in his own filth, chained to the oar, still murmuring their battle cry, to God alone belongs dominion. He would be repeating it with his last breath. And that is the nature of the Jews. Once they get something into their heads, all the whips and scourges in the world will not drive it out. This rabbi, whose sermon I now hold in my hand, belonged to the type. He too proclaims the divinity as the sole ruler and admits of no other near it. There it was in the text, a man cannot serve 2 masters. He went further. He bade his followers give up the baneful habit of producing bread and raiment through laborious effort. Take no thought for your lives, saying, what shall we eat? What shall we drink? Or how shall we be clothed? What was this but incitement to laziness? And again, gather no treasures on earth, where rust and moths corrupt, where thieves break in and steal, but gather treasures in heaven, where rust and moths cannot corrupt. What was this but disorder and rebellion? It was an attack on the entire existing order and rule. It was worse because more specific than the slogan of the rebellious Judah the Galilean. It said, refuse to work, break the forms of the system, sit with folded arms until your invisible God will send down bread from heaven. If such sentiments were accepted by the people, the land would sink into ruin. From whom would we Romans then collect taxes? With what would we support our soldiers? In effect, this man called on his followers to destroy life in order that we might be destroyed also. Why, I asked myself, was such a man permitted to run around free and to continue his dangerous work? He attacked the very process of law. If a man sue you at law and take away your coat, give him your cloak also. Direct encouragement to lawlessness, contempt for the courts, no oaths to be taken, because you cannot make one hair black or white. But this was the destruction of the fundamental forms of legal administration. He would wipe out all codes, forbid men to resist evildoers. If a man smite you on the right cheek, turn the left also.